the logic that makes endless debt inevitable, the trajectory from rollover to stagnation. Have you ever stopped to think about why these layers of government obligations just keep stacking up year after year, never really getting cleared away like an ordinary loan? It feels like a puzzle that sits right in front of us. Yet the pieces keep shifting. The interest piles on, the total grows faster than straightforward explanations suggest, and the people actually producing value through their effort end up carrying the weight while others collect steady returns. Today we are going to walk through exactly how this pattern locks in, why the logic of it resists easy fixes, and where the whole arrangement tends to push the broader society once the incentives settle into place. The surface story often runs that these obligations are just temporary bridges for big projects or emergencies, and that steady economic expansion will eventually make them manageable. But look closer at the actual flow of funds and the decisions behind them. When payments on older promises come due, new promises are issued to cover the principal. That rollover keeps the machine turning without any requirement to shrink the overall stock. Add in ongoing shortfalls between what comes in through revenue and what goes out in spending, and the interest compounds on a larger base each cycle. The relative size compared to the economy's output does not shrink on its own. It expands whenever the cost of carrying the obligations outruns the pace of real expansion, and fresh shortfalls keep feeding the total. If this breakdown of the mechanics, incentives, and direction resonates, give it a like to help others examine these patterns. Share it with people who need to see where the trajectory leads. Subscribe for more straight talks on the systems that shape our choices, and drop your thoughts in the comments so we can sharpen the reasoning together. Think about who actually receives the interest flows. The claims end up in the hands of pension arrangements, investment pools, banks that treat them as reliable collateral, insurance portfolios, and a portion held by entities outside the immediate system. Those holders receive regular payments backed by the power to collect from current producers. The money does not vanish into some abstract void. It moves toward specific groups who hold the paper or manage the funds. Meanwhile, the revenue side draws from taxes on work, production, and exchange. Every cycle, that interest claim takes a slice that could have gone toward current services or left in the hands of those who earned it. Over repeated cycles, the slice grows because the base itself is larger and the rate environment can shift upward when confidence wavers or new issuance floods the market. Now consider the decision-makers who keep authorizing the fresh shortfalls. They face immediate pressures to deliver visible programs, contracts, transfers, and projects that please organized groups today. Raising revenue enough to cover everything right now would require visible tax increases that hit current voters directly. Borrowing spreads that visibility across time and across a wider pool of future contributors who cannot vote in the present cycle. The benefits concentrate on those who receive the spending or the contracts. The costs diffuse across everyone who will pay later through higher extraction or eroded purchasing power. That imbalance in timing and visibility creates a steady pull toward more obligations rather than restraint. No single actor inside the process has a strong personal stake in forcing a reversal, because the reversal would mean disappointing the current beneficiaries while the gains from restraint arrive too late to help the decision-maker's immediate position. Some voices argue that none of this matters much because the obligations are simply owed within the same broad system, or that future expansion will outrun the carrying cost. That line of reasoning collapses once you track where the interest actually lands and who supplies the revenue. Even when holdings sit inside the borders, they represent enforceable claims on future tax collections. Those collections come from people who work and produce, not from some neutral pool that includes the holders in equal measure. When a meaningful share sits with entities that face lighter effective extraction or with arrangements outside the immediate tax base, the transfer becomes even clearer. Printing additional currency to ease the pressure does not eliminate the claim. It spreads the cost through rising prices that hit fixed incomes, savers, and wage earners first. That hidden extraction still falls on producers while preserving the income stream for the holders. The arithmetic does not balance in favor of the claim that everything nets out harmlessly. Another common reassurance holds that disciplined growth alone will stabilize everything without any need to confront the underlying incentives. Yet the pattern shows otherwise when fresh shortfalls continue and the carrying cost begins to exceed the expansion rate. Each added layer of obligations raises the future interest bill, which in turn requires either more revenue extraction or still more issuance. The relative burden climbs rather than recedes. Historical moments when the ratio eased did not come from simply waiting for expansion. They came from periods of unusually strong real growth combined with price adjustments that reduced the real value of older claims, or from outright restraint that cut spending and applied revenues to reduction. Those moments proved rare and temporary. Once the spending pressures returned, the total resumed its climb. Attempts to force a rapid nominal clearance through severe cuts on the spending side have produced widespread hardship, shortages, and eventual backlash that undid the effort. The record does not show a smooth glide path powered only by expansion while the incentive structure stays unchanged. Now turn to the people whose daily effort supplies the revenue. When a growing portion of what they generate flows into servicing distant claims rather than into services they directly value or into their own retained reward, the marginal return on extra work or risk-taking declines. People respond to that signal. They adjust hours, shift activity toward less visible channels, or simply stop pushing for the next increment of output once the additional tax and price pressure swallows most of the gain. That behavioral adjustment is not theoretical. It appears whenever effective extraction, combining explicit collections with the erosion from monetary expansion, reaches levels that visibly detach effort from reward. The result is slower overall expansion precisely when the obligations require stronger expansion to stay manageable. The loop feeds itself. Subnational layers face a sharper version of the same pressures. They cannot rely on the same degree of rollover flexibility because they lack the power to expand the currency base at will. Their obligations often surface first through unfunded promises for future retirement and health costs. When those come due, the choices narrow to higher local collections, cuts in current services, or restructuring. The pain arrives sooner and more visibly to the same people who must keep producing to fund it. That contrast highlights why the central layer can sustain the pattern longer while the costs still accumulate. The deeper moral issue is that this arrangement severs consent across time. Current decision-makers commit future producers to claims those future producers never directly agreed to bear. The mechanism does not require open expropriation. It works through layers of promises whose costs are shifted forward and whose benefits are enjoyed now. That shift weakens the basic link between voluntary production and retained reward that allows societies to sustain high levels of cooperation and innovation over generations. Once that link frays, the willingness to invest effort, to take productive risks, and to maintain the institutions that protect property and contract begins to erode from within. Societies operating under these incentives do not remain static. The share of resources absorbed by carrying the obligations trends upward. Productive investment faces increasing competition from the need to service past claims. The relative reward for additional work or enterprise shrinks, which slows the very expansion that would otherwise ease the pressure. Trust in the stability of the unit of account declines as participants sense that value is being redistributed through price channels rather than through transparent agreement. Parallel arrangements for exchange and storage of value emerge as people seek to protect what they produce from the ongoing extraction. In the longer arc, either a sharp correction arrives through higher carrying costs that force visible restraint, or the erosion of productive incentives leads to stagnation that makes the original obligations even harder to sustain. The direction is toward greater fiscal dominance over economic life, reduced dynamism, and eventual pressure for a reset in how obligations are created and honored. One principle that keeps surfacing across these patterns is simple and old. When the connection between effort and retained reward is systematically thinned by layers of claims that do not require ongoing consent, the motivation to produce at full capacity fades. People still work to meet immediate needs, but the surplus that funds genuine progress and buffers against shocks shrinks. Societies that normalize this thinning end up with lower overall capacity precisely when they need more capacity to carry the weight they have accumulated. The practical takeaway is not complicated. Any arrangement that lets current spending outrun current revenue while shifting the gap forward through compounding claims will eventually test the limits of what producers are willing to sustain. The test does not arrive as a single dramatic moment in most cases. It arrives as a gradual crowding out, a quiet withdrawal of extra effort, and a growing sense that the rules no longer align reward with contribution. Recognizing that dynamic early gives room to re-anchor decisions to current revenue and to mechanisms that keep future claims from outrunning the consent and capacity of those who must honor them. The alternative is to watch the pattern continue until the costs become impossible to ignore or to shift any further. Thanks for staying with this all the way through. If the logic holds up under examination, the next step is to apply the same scrutiny to the specific rules and incentives operating around you. The pattern is not mysterious once the flows and the timing of costs and benefits are laid out plainly. It is a predictable result of misaligned horizons and concentrated gains against diffuse burdens. Understanding that gives a clearer picture of where the trajectory leads and what would be required to change it.